Hello and welcome back to another episode of our sponsored interview series In the Spotlight. I'm Jordan O'Brien, Managing Editor of Data Center Review and Electrical Review. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Alex McLean, Head of Business for IT Cooling Western Europe at Stäubli. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
Welcome. Good to be here, Jordan.
I'm just wondering if you can give our audience a short intro into what your job entails exactly.
Yes, so my main focus in my role is to transition what has been a very strong area for us to operate in across the US, the Far East, Taiwan, Singapore, etc., and to transfer that experience that we have working with the large Microsofts, Nvidias, hyperscalers across there, and transition that across to Europe, which is a rapidly growing sector, and to bridge that gap and bring that knowledge and experience to partners who are often just starting on the journey of liquid cooling in Europe.
Yeah, it's a massively expanding journey. You just saw last week all of the announcements in the US, in the UK from the US tech giants. So I think you're going to be very busy. But I wanted to know, there's been a recent shift towards manufacturing racks in Europe, and obviously Stäubli is leading that charge. That's why you have the job that you have. Can you tell us why that shift is occurring exactly?
Yeah, I think for us, we see there's three main drivers for it. First, there is, as we just spoke about, the explosion in AI workloads, GPU dense racks. It's forcing the operators to rethink their strategies towards cooling. We're not just talking about a year ago, 10 kilowatt, 20 kilowatt racks. In the last 6 months, people were future talking about 100 kilowatts. We're past there. We're looking at 500 kilowatt racks already. So that explosion is really driving a need for companies to say, we just can't do this in the existing areas where we're manufacturing, where we're designing, where we're specifying. People need to use the globe to carry out these activities because it's growing so quickly. That kind of ties in a little bit with the second driver, which we're seeing is supply chain resilience. If we can go back to the horrible times of the pandemic and talk about that really brought the importance of supply chain to companies in terms of having local supply chains, because the pandemic happened, people realised they couldn't rely on global supply all the time. So the big drive towards that, people are investing in local manufacturing sites just so that they can tackle the supply chain resilience. And I suppose finally is the sustainability aspect of it. We see at the last ISE event I was at in Hamburg, Schneider Electric at the time just announced they had been voted Time Magazine's most sustainable company in the world for the second time. Now, for them, that's a big driver for them. They do not want to be thought of as losing that title. So they cannot be building racks in Taiwan, Singapore, Taipei, whatever it might be, and shipping those across for developments in Europe. So they are looking to build racks close to the sites where they'll be deployed. This reduces their carbon footprint and helps them carry on with that goal of achieving sustainability.
Yeah, I guess they're all really good points, because some supply chains haven't really recovered fully from COVID still. Obviously, it's improved, but then you've also got tariff discussions, and you've got sustainability being obviously a big one at the moment. Everyone wants to be a bit more sustainable, and having it locally produced and not shipped, as you say, from like Taiwan obviously helps. Obviously, globally, we have relied on manufacturing in the US and China. From your perspective, how does Europe differ from those markets in terms of product and service offerings?
Yeah, I suppose for me, the main thing is that the US has has been doing this for a long time. So they've learned to move fast. Everything they do is rapid deployment. Everything they do is moving quickly to keep up with pace. As announcements come out, we'll get 5 million GPUs being announced by NVIDIA yesterday. The US market just moves and adapts to what they need to do. Europe traditionally has been a little bit slower to adapt and change, often focusing on procedures and quality and stuff, getting things in place before they move. And this industry, you just can't take your time to do that. I often say that the DC world is like dog years. 1 year is like 7 years. Things just move so quick. So Europe has lagged behind in that ability to move quickly, but it's shifting, and that really happens because of the connections between companies who've operated in the US. It's collaboration. That's what's really driving it. It's having partners. People trust their partners more than any other industry I've ever worked in, because they know someone else has already done it. Let's look to what they've done. And that, I suppose that plays to our strengths a little bit, because we have been present in the US for a long time. We've worked with the hyperscalers before AI was on the market. We've been with them for the past 12 years when it was the small part of the business. Air cooling was a big part, liquid cooling was a small part. So we've helped companies transition for a long time.
I was about to ask whether or not you felt that shift in terms of, from government as well, in terms of supporting data centers and AI companies, because every government in Europe and the EU, whether it's the UK, they're all eager to be like the center of AI development, and they see the US as, sort of a deregulated market where obviously there are regulations, but not as heavily regulated as over here, where AI is rapidly growing, and they're like, I want a slice of that pie. Do you see that sort of like shift happening in Europe now?
Yeah, completely. We're seeing new entrants to the market every single month, every week almost. I was at DCD Connect last week in London, and I think there was at least 6 companies launching CDUs. Companies who are building manufacturing in the European region, and they're all launching new CDUs to the marketplace at the moment. Different stages. Some are talking about it. Some have just brought to the market. In fact, there was one launched at DCD last week. 2 years ago, that was all done in the US, Far East, and now that really has shifted, towards it. And they're still looking for quality. What they're trying to do is future-proof things. They know it's moving so quickly, so there's a big focus on future-proofing what they're doing. They've had the advantage of seeing how quickly things have moved in the US, and they've learned from the mistakes where they've maybe only designed and built for the present. Now, the European companies that we deal with are very much designing for the future, to future-proof their installations.
I was going to say, what do you see as the biggest advantages of manufacturing in Europe? And I think you just answered one of the big ones, which is obviously, while the US had the first mover advantage, we had the ability to sort of watch what was going on over there and adapt. But are there any other big advantages, do you think, of manufacturing in Europe?
I mean, fundamentally, proximity is the main advantage, just being close to your supply chain. And that's not just from delivery point of view, that's about being able to collaborate on design, developments, whether that be bring a sample in, go and look at stuff as they're happening and adapt. So proximity is a major factor in it, and whether you're designing a CDU or installing a CDU, being able to go to site, get involved in factory acceptance tests is a huge benefit for the companies operating in Europe at the moment. Yeah.
Now, you obviously said at the beginning of this interview that you recently taken on this role to sort of help Europeans sort of understand what's going on elsewhere. How ready is the local infrastructure to support European companies like building?
It's close. It's catching up quickly, definitely. The number of people we see being involved in the full cycle, from manifolds as well. There's pre-engineered cooling loops being produced locally. Certainly wasn't always the case. We are seeing a big shift in companies who've historically worked in cooling from air cooling perspective. So they know the cooling market and they know the data center market, but they don't know the direct-to-chip liquid cooling market. And they are transitioning across, but they are reaching out. They're talking to people like us. I mentioned how people have learned from, not necessarily mistakes, but learned from what's been done in the past and how things have changed. We do that also. We're part of that chain who speaks to companies and says, well, okay, what can we do better? How can we adapt our offering? And we've brought to the market TDU connector, which is a large bore spill-free connector for connecting CDUs to the facility water, primary, secondary loops. Now, we were not involved in that market a couple of years ago because it just wasn't a big enough sector for us in Europe. But we've had the advantage of designing that differently from the previous versions of that connector that are in the marketplace. And what we've done is really future-proofed it. The focus on flow. We have a 2-inch connector which I'll cool a 780 kilowatt rack through one 2-inch connector, which is something that nobody would have cared about or asked about before. But we have developed that because it's future-proofing for where we're going. And that's in collaboration with the local manufacturers across. In the UK, it's a very strong area for it. People from the UK and Ireland are operating across all of Europe. There's a real strength and skill force across the UK, and that's being deployed across all of Europe, the Nordics, across Italy and things like that. So very, very robust infrastructure now compared to where it was a couple of years ago.
I guess it's a really exciting time to be in data centers, I think, and especially cooling, because data centers need more cooling than ever before, and it's not going to slow down. You're going to be very busy. Like you say, you future-proofed it, but the future comes much faster than we all expect. Now, I just want to wrap up, and if you could leave our audience with one piece of advice on cooling and Stäubli's own offerings, what would that be?
I suppose really I think long term. In an industry where you've got to think short, everything happens short term, you have got to think long term still. Choose partners, work with partners and collaborate with people who have components that are just not going to solve today's problems, but should still be performing in, I don't know, 10 years is maybe ambitious because who knows what 10 years will look like, but certainly 5 to 10 years is what you want to be thinking long term. It's design with the future in mind. We're looking to provide our part of a solution that will limit downtime for companies as the power demands, the water demands increase. There's a focus on the sustainability aspect of it. We need to be playing our part in that. But yeah, in one line, I would say design with the future in mind. That would be my one.
That's an amazing response. And funnily enough, I was watching a video earlier on the Windows 95 launch. I know this sounds very left field, but it was the BBC News article video about how it launched, and they said that Bill Gates, the reason Microsoft was so successful is he always had one eye on the future, and he almost had like this way of knowing where technology was going, and now we all need to do that. We all need to prepare for the future. We all need to be Bill Gates, and hopefully we can all be as successful as Bill Gates if we do that. All right. Thank you very much, Alex. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.